Somebody posts a photo of a hawk on their bird feeder and comments are usually heartbroken. I hate that thing. Get them away from my baby birds. Like the hawk broke some kind of rule just by being a hawk. Somebody else posts a crow doing something clever, and the comment is, boy, that was creepy. Or a vulture circles around a field, and the universal shorthand is, oh, something must have died in that field. No explanation needed. Welcome back to Buzz Blossom and Squeak, where I talk about nature right outside your front door, and I'm Jill from the North Woods. I wanted to talk about birds that we've quietly decided are villains. And they tend to be hawks, owls, vultures, shrikes, crows, and it makes the case that there's no such thing. Not one of them is a villain. They're not enemies, they're not bullies, and they get out of being people's favorite birds because they're doing a job the ecosystem actually needs to have done. We're going to go through it a little bit, bird by bird, through what that job actually is and why it looks like what they're doing may seem sinister, but it's not actually. What happens when we forget that this place that these birds are doing actually helps make everything in the environment better? So here's the thing about calling an animal, of any animal kind, a villain. It's a story that we tell ourselves, and it's something that the animal is just doing based on its own instincts. A hawk doesn't experience malice when it takes out a sparrow in your feeder. It experiences hunger. It has babies to feed, and it does the same thing that you do 3 times a day. And we don't call out ourselves as villains for eating a sandwich, but because we get emotionally attached to smaller, prettier birds at our feeder, the chickadees and the finches and the cardinals, the birds that get to eat them get cast as a bad guy in the story. But it's just a story that really exists in our head. I mean, my friend saw it yesterday that a mourning dove that was on one of her feeders got taken out by a hawk. And it's not even just feeder birds. It's about how we react differently to a hawk taking a small bird rather than the chickadee eating a caterpillar. Both are predators. They're both killing one animal to live, but it happens on a scale that we find charming and another one that's on a scale that we find upsetting. And so that line really doesn't have much to do with biology. It's just about which animal we've decided to root for. And the instinct isn't wrong, by the way. I feel this way too. It's human to root for the underdog or the cute bird, the finch at the bird feeder. We don't think about it the same way when we see a robin pulling a worm out of the ground. And it's worth noting that what starts shaping how we think about entire species, because once a species gets cast as a villain, we stop being curious about it. We stop asking what it's actually doing out there. And the real cost of this enemy bird story is not that it's unkind to the hawks, but it makes us ignore them. We don't learn anything about them, and we don't understand how the whole system fits together. It was a couple months ago when I was out hiking on a marsh road. There was 2 cuckoos there, a yellow-billed cuckoo and a black-billed cuckoo. And both those birds are known as what we called a couple of weeks ago parasitic birds, where they'll put their eggs in other birds' nests. And I found it true that when I started talking about brown-headed cowbirds, those guys again, or when we see a hawk, run, little birds, run. We're scared. We want the little bird to get away. And then I think my friend and I were talking about it, and she goes, I don't even want to count these brown-headed cowbirds. I just dislike them so much because they're putting eggs in other nests and causing the eggs of the bird that already had eggs in the nest to maybe ignore their own young. So you get a story in your head. I don't want to count them anymore. I don't even want to observe them anymore. And it started making me have this question. Do people leave some of these birds we don't like off of count lists because they upset us? So anyway, I was thinking, I wonder if there's something that our opinion of what birds are doing affects how we notice them. So let's take the Cooper's hawk. My friend has a bunch of Cooper's hawk in her backyard. She has a whole family, and now they're growing up. They are built for exactly this. They're short, rounded wings with long rudder tails, and that bird is designed for fast, tight turns around trees, through shrubs, spreading branches at a speed of a compact car that buzzes through city highways. a backyard full of traffic is close to ideal as a hunting ground for a bird like this. A big share of their diet are songbirds, and they're not being cruel about it in the same way the fox is not being cruel when it tries to feed its young, or a heron is good at being a heron and feeding its young. The part that gets left out of the story is that the hawks at the feeder aren't wiping out the songbird population. They're doing something actually closer to quality control. The bird most likely to get caught are often the sick ones, the slow ones, the distracted ones who are not on guard all the time, or the ones who have something working against them. Maybe an injury or some kind of a parasitic load inside their system. The bird is almost, that is sick, is almost a half second slower in reacting to a shadow overhead. And it's not a comforting thought, but it's genuinely important. Predators put pressure on birds that keeps the songbirds population healthier, more alert, and reproducing with birds that are actually better fit to survive. The removal of the pressure, you don't get healthier songbirds. You get songbirds that don't have to be quite as sharp or quite as healthy, which is an entirely different thing. And the version of this that plays out with these hawks is that the Cooper hawks and their smaller cousins, the sharp-shin hawks, versus the bigger soaring hawks like the red-tail hawks that hunt in open fields looking for rodents and rabbits. The different body, different hunting strategy, different prey, but it's worth knowing that not all hawks are one thing. Cooper hawks are at feeders. Red-tailed hawks are on highway, lampposts, doing something usually quite different. But owls even get a worse reputation because there's a lot of cultural baggage that has nothing to do with the bird itself. There's a lot of folklore, particularly across Europe and in indigenous traditions in the Americas too, that calls the owl at night as some kind of an omen, a bad luck, an indication that death is coming and something to fear. And some of that is just traces back to the fact that owls hunt silently and are nocturnal, which makes the animal feel a little bit unsettling. And we usually, when we think of predators, think about daylight, warning sounds, but meanwhile, that owl is doing something entirely silent and keeping the local population from exploding. A single barn owl feeding a family can go through in a nesting season an enormous amount of rodents. And so we'll, pin that exact figure before can hunt an enormous, but even at a conservative estimate, the numbers are startling. If you've never had a mouse problem near or active to an owl territory, it's not a coincidence. The farmers put up barn owl boxes instead of relying on other methods to control the rodents, because the owls will be able to actually do it better. They work at it, and they will be able to clean up the rodent problem without the use of poison, without impacting the food chain, the way that a rodent poison would do. I've seen owls. I had a chance to go on a kayak tour that got to see owls. One flew right over my head, and I never even heard it. It is silent, and so it's a bit freaky. But anyway, some birds, they don't even need to catch anything at all to get cast as villain. They sometimes can look the part. Turkey vultures are a good example of that. They're bald, they're hunched, they circle at a particular area. Every visual cue we get associated with them, it gives us the idea of menace wrapped up in a bird. There's cartoons out there that I was raised with when a kid that when a vulture circled around you, you were done. But what are they actually doing? They're not killing anything, they're cleaning up. A turkey vulture's whole biology is built around eating things that would otherwise sit there, rot, and potentially spread disease. Their stomach acid is so extraordinary and corrosive and strong, it can neutralize any bacteria, pathogens that would make almost any other animal seriously ill. Botulism, anthrax, even rabies, in some documented case, will pass out of the vulture's gut without harming the bird. The bald head is designed not as a flaw either. It's specifically so that carrion doesn't stick to its feathers and fester in a gross way. And so it's not gross in and of itself. It's an effective sanitation system in the animal kingdom to keep that animal clean while it's eating something that maybe had a disease. So it unsettles people. But you know what? Ecologists actually track vulture populations decline as public health concerns for this exact reason. In parts of South Asia, where the vulture population crashed, carcass disposal slowly went up. You started getting feral dogs, and rat populations grew in its place. And along with that came additional diseases. So it plays a very important part in the nature system. Shrikes are maybe the strangest case of all. They are actually the size of songbirds. They're genuinely cute birds and handsome, and they got this gray black with this band around its eyes. And they've earned the nickname of the butcher bird because they will impale its prey on thorns and barbed wire fences to cache it for later, save it until they can eat it. They don't have talons. They don't have any sort of a method where they can actually kill a bird. So what they do is they smash it into something else. It's a brutal way of hearing about it, but they look like just a small diving bird. And what it's doing is solving an engineering problem. How do you eat like a hawk when you're built like a sparrow? A shrike's larder, the thorn bush strung with grasshoppers, you'll see it. Small rodents, even some small birds pegged on some kind of a thing. It's a pantry. And it's the same impulse that you have when you fill your chest freezer in the fall. The presentation is dramatic, but the logic of it is completely ordinary. We found a shrike that people announced on a local birding board, and it said, "You ever want to go see a shrike? There's one on a pole, a wire in this location." Drove out there, like 20 minutes later, sure enough, sitting right there. It's a really cool looking bird, but it has its own place to play in this. Then comes crows and ravens, and it's so funny because if hawks get accused of villainy and vultures get accused of being gross, crows and ravens, magpies, jays get accused of something almost even worse, of being sinister. And it's not that the fact of what it's hungry for, it's scheming, it's plotting, and some of that goes back centuries. Crows and ravens show up over and over in folklore as death omens and battlefield scavengers and tricksters and the bad, anything bad. But this reputation is that corvids are scavengers. Crows on a battlefield will do work of that, clean up the same thing like a vulture would do. But a huge part of the sinister reputation is really just discomfort about how smart these birds are. Bernd Heinrich wrote a book about crows, and it's amazing. But these animals recognize people. They're incredibly smart. They're able to figure out puzzles or way of getting food out of something that no one else could use. They even use a scientific test where a corvid can use a tool to get another tool to get a piece of food, and they've tried that out. So essentially, they had to get this long stick to poke out a shorter stick and use the shorter stick to get out a piece of food. They're capable of doing that. They're smart. They watch people back. And one of the things that, people don't or maybe don't realize is, like I said, they can memorize an individual human face, hold it in their memory for years. Not only that, tell their children about that face. So there were some studies done with masks to see if that was true. And it's absolutely true that once a crow recognizes something or someone as an enemy, it will last crow generations before that face can show again, before the crows start, they'll caw, they might mob the thing, anyway. But ravens have been shown plans for future events. They've used tools in a way that's considered to be exclusively primate behavior. And it's not a menace. They're just really, really smart. And that smart is essentially something that gives them the cultural story that this bird is creepy instead of, wow, that bird is super smart. I went to the Tower of London in England, and there was a story that whenever the crows, the ravens leave the Tower of London, that is when London will fall. So there is a special person there whose whole job it is to keep ravens at the Tower of London. So anyway, ecologically, corvids are generalists. They eat whatever they can, carrion, insects, eggs, grain, garbage, whatever is available, they'll eat it. And so they're flexible, which is exactly why they thrive really well around human beings, because we have a lot of opportunity around us when humans are there. A thrown out hot dog, a garbage bin that got left over, a bird feeder. They will make use of anything that they possibly can. And so that is the same trait that we'll see, in coyotes and raccoons as well. Adaptability isn't villainy. It's just what survival looks like once you stop expecting nature to fit into a tidy bucket, I guess to say. So I really enjoy all these animals now that I understand a little bit about them. Turkey vultures, I saw one that was injured that got released back into nature, so I got to stand up very close to it, just a mere few feet away. But, the thing to think of is that the hawk, the owl, the vulture, the shrike, and the crow and ravens, they're not breaking any rules. They're just doing their part in nature that maybe sometimes we just don't like to think about very hard. In a smart way, we understand that they have a place to play inside of the environment, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable. The songbird, is getting eaten as part of the story we notice, but it helps the songbird to stay healthy. The vulture cleaning up nature, the corvid being an opportunist, all those things help make nature a little bit better. And that's why it's important for us to not pit animals or birds as villains. I think that if you pulled every hawk, owl, shrike, corvid out of the ecosystem tomorrow, it wouldn't turn into a peaceful paradise for the smaller birds. The entire ecosystem would collapse entirely. It would go in a completely different direction. Rodents and insect populations would boom unchecked. The owls and hawks keep them in balance. They'd be gone. Disease would spread further and faster because nothing is there to clean up the carcasses that the vultures and the corvids do. This is the part that people find counterintuitive, that they think that these animals are harming nature or causing the songbird population to crash, when actually they're helping the environment and the songbird population stay more resilient. They're basically weeding out the weakest, sickest, lowest individuals. And so you have the songbirds in the short term that are steadier, healthier, and better to reproduce in a long time. The real world version of this is that regions that lost apex avian predators through pesticide use like DDT saw the ripple effect through rodents and other types of population. And that eventually set back all the songbirds. Eventually, those areas recovered as the predatory birds started to recover as well. So these predators, they're not flaws in the system. They take on a load that the environment needs. And so anytime you see a scary bird on a list, it's doing its job to make the environment better. And it's actually working exactly the way it needs to be working. Everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you being out there. I think the real shift about all of this is that some people, think of cardinals and robins and they like them, and then they think of the hawks as villains or omens or something creepy. But birds are just doing what birds do in the backyard, in the forest, and there's no scheme behind it. There's nothing sinister about it at all. If you have anything to say to me, you can email me at jillstartwithsmallsteps.com. If you're looking to go heavier into this, Cornell's All About Birds has an excellent, accessible species page for every single one of the birds. You can start looking them up. Thanks so much for being there, and I can't wait to see you next time.